My son didn't speak to me for 2 decades. Then he heard I got rich and invited me to Christmas. He thought I'd bring a check. I brought something heavier. If you believe real justice doesn't always look like revenge but sometimes feels like it hit like, subscribe and stick with me. This one starts bitter and ends with a very specific kind of peace. The first time my son said he didn't want me at Christmas. He was 8 and didn't know the words were borrowed. They still fit him like a costume, big, drooping sleeves, a mouth too small for a hard line. We were standing on the porch of the townhouse his mother had moved into after the separation. The door was open just enough for December to seep out. Pine from a plastic wreath. Nutmeg. The warm, wet animal smell of a house with a child in it. Mom says you didn't try hard enough, he murmured, not looking at me. He studied the toe of his sneaker, making circles in the frost in the same spot where I used to write his name with sidewalk chalk. I had a Lego kit under my arm and a coffee that had gone cold in my other hand. I said, Bud, I've written. I stopped, because I could hear her in the hallway, the soft, decisive shush of someone who already knows how this scene will end. The papers said custody in the clinical way a manual might talk about removing a faulty part. I paid on time. I showed up on time. I brought the Lego, and the mitt, and the cheap plastic trophy from his Saturday league the last year we still did Saturdays together. Still, the porch was where we met, and where the conversations ended. A porch isn't a home. It's a choice you never get to walk through. He looked up at me, then brown eyes that used to light up at the sight of a truck. My truck, and he tried to make his face hard. Don't come next time. You learn quickly what you can't fight. By the time he was 12, my Christmases were a peanut butter sandwich, an old movie, a walk around the block in a hat that kept the wind from getting inside the place where your thoughts shake. The only sound in the apartment was the radiator knocking, a patient trying to get the nurse. I kept a shoebox under the bed with returned letters, birthday cards stamped not at this address or refused, and a small pile of receipts, child support, school fundraisers. I donated to anonymously because the paperwork had a line for other relatives. I had left my marriage, not my son. But try explaining that to a boy whose mother is better with words, whose mother is very good at making absence sound like choice. I wasn't blameless. I worked too much. I was angry in all the wrong rooms. There were nights I left late, and mornings I came back early, and nothing I did filled the spaces I had made. By the time he turned 18, the words were his. The phone call lasted 14 seconds. You can time your life by the kinds of silences you survive. I'm an adult, he said. You don't have to call anymore. I sat on the edge of my bed, after he hung up, and let the quiet sit in my chest like a stone that wouldn't pass. I made coffee to have something warm to hold. Steam fogged my glasses. The calendar on the wall always skipped December, even in July. What do you do with a fatherhood you're not allowed to perform? I did the small things. I built a life out of fittings and ductwork, and the stubborn faith that air, when directed carefully, makes rooms livable. I started with a van and a second-hand crimping tool. The business had my name on it because there was no one else's that made sense. I learned people's houses the way doctors learn bodies, where the heat leaks, where the cold drafts work their fingers under doors. I grew, I hired, I kept receipts, I kept waking up, and that sometimes felt like the bravest thing. Then life did what it does. It took and it gave. His mother died first, quietly and too early. I sent flowers because it was the last courtesy I knew. The card read, "For the good you did. Grief is a lonely language." It didn't make him call. And then, last summer, an offer came that would have felt like science fiction 15 years earlier. A regional home services company wanted my roots, my customer list, my good name. They said consolidation and valuation and legacy. I said nothing for a week, because I didn't trust what breathing felt like. The number on the paper looked like a prank. More money than my father had seen in his lifetime and mine together. I did the unglamorous work, lawyers, taxes, earnest, dull signatures that carried more weight than my arm did. After it cleared, my bank account numbers looked wrong, like the font was pretending. I kept the van. I kept my old wrench, the one with my initials scratched in the handle with a nail. I didn't post about it. I didn't tell the few friends I had who'd still be impressed. So when my phone buzzed 3 months later with a text from an unknown number, "Hey, Joe heard you did well this year. We've got room if you want to join us for Christmas. Would be good to talk about." Legacy. I sat on the edge of the bed with my coffee cooling in my hands and watched the steam disappear. I knew his number, by the way. It made my pulse change. I stared long enough to get mad at myself for how fast the hope rose. It felt like being offered water after a drought, and then remembering you'd learned to live on grit. I texted back, "I'd like that. What should I bring?" He answered in under a minute, "Just yourself. Maybe you can share ideas. Been thinking about the future a lot." The word future did to me what Christmas carols used to do when I first stopped going into stores in December. It told the truth and lied at the same time. I turned off the lamp and lay in the grey. The radiator knocked. The shoebox under the bed was heavier than it had any right to be. I slept badly. I always slept badly in December. The next morning, I took the lid off the shoebox. 20 years fits in there if you fold it. I thought about showing up with nothing, about accepting the invitation exactly as given, but I am old enough to know that invitations are sometimes bait. I closed the box gently. Then I called my lawyer. The last thing he said before we hung up was, "Are you sure you want to do this at Christmas?" I said, "Christmas is when this started." And he said, "All right, Joe, let's make it clean. You can't rehearse a reconciliation." But I tried. I practiced in the van, talking to the empty passenger seat, like it could argue back. "I'm here because you asked. I'm not here to fight. No, I didn't get rich. I got paid for the part of my life that still worked. Lines like nails in a pocket, useful until you need a hammer." I scrolled social media. I didn't belong to. I found him in a tagged photo at a Little League field, his arm around a boy with my eyes and a cowlick that defied pomade, and a girl with a smile that belonged to nobody but herself. The caption said, "Proud Dad. My throat did that ache that wants to be either laughter or crying and can't decide. So it makes a fist." He had a wife, Emily. In pictures, she looked like the person in a group who remembers who needs water and where the car is parked. She wore simple jewelry, the kind that means something. In one photo, her hand rested lightly on his shoulder, like a promise. I wanted to be mad at the fact that I didn't know her laugh. A week before Christmas, he called. His voice had grown into a man's without my ears on it. Deeper, yes, but the cadence still clipped when he was uncomfortable. Still too quick when he was selling an idea. He was selling "Dad's sorry, Joe." He corrected fast, like the word had sprung out by accident. "We're so excited you're coming. We were thinking," and he said it like it was a casual left turn. "We were thinking we could also chat about, estate stuff. You've worked hard. It would be smart to make sure it stays in the family." I put him on speaker and made myself watch my hands so they'd stay steady. I traced a circle on a yellow legal pad. My heart had a hammer in it. I said, "We can talk." He mistook my calm for agreement. "Great. We've been a little tight with mortgage rates and Emily's taking a break from work to be with the kids, and college is wild now. So any thoughts about distribution?" "I don't mean now," he added, laughing, a laugh I didn't recognize, a laugh with someone else's sense of humor in it. "Just, you'll know legacy." There it was again, the word he'd hung the invite on. "Legacy," I repeated, tasting it. It was like a candy that never broke down, just got smaller until it turned sharp in your molars. After we hung up, the apartment felt like a room that used to be mine and wasn't anymore. I walked the length of it from stove to window and back until I'd worn a path only I could see. The radiator breathed slow. The shoebox under the bed hummed like it had a current. Sleep went thin again. I'd wake at 2:13 a.m. the same time 3 nights in a row, stare at the ceiling, and count the cracks like constellations. The smell of cold came through the window's seams, the metallic edge of snow on its way. When your heart and your head can't agree, your body keeps score. Coffee in the morning found an empty stomach and burned just enough to make me feel awake. My hands shook when I didn't want them to. I'd put on my coat and forget my keys, and then laugh at myself until I ran out of air. 2 days before Christmas, I went to see my lawyer, a man whose shirts are always the exact same white, and whose pens are never clicked because they're all fountain. He'd drawn the documents I'd asked for like he was drafting a bridge. The plan wasn't complicated. It was careful. To trust's a revocable one for each grandchild, seeded not with everything but with enough that college would never be a gun to anyone's head. A trustee who wasn't family, who couldn't be spooked by a tense phone call or a tearful kitchen table. Language that made it very clear that the money was not to be touched by parents for household needs or emergencies, unless those emergencies involved the actual survival of the children. A separate gift. set aside, that would grow at a fixed rate and pay out at milestones. 18, 22, 25. Not when my son wanted a new grill, but when my grandchildren were building lives that didn't need to be paid for, in apologies. And then there was a letter, not the kind you scrawl in anger at midnight, not the kind you read and wish you hadn't sent. A clean, notarized letter that said, in so many sentences, I love you. I wanted you. I didn't leave you. I left a marriage that didn't work, and that loss got weaponized against me. Here is the ledger. Here is the proof. What I will give you now is not money. It's a chance. The chance was this: therapy 12 sessions, paid by me, no strings except attendance, with a counselor who specialized in estrangement and grief. A commitment from both of us to show up to those sessions and say the quiet parts out loud. If we completed those, if we did the work neither of us had done when he was 8, and I was furious and his mother was rightfully hurt, if we did that, then we would discuss a gift, not a blank check. A gift, sized not to erase history but to build a future that didn't punish either of us for it. Cal looked over the rim of his glasses like a judge who sees a plea deal he can live with. You're sure about the no direct gift now? I'm sure, I said, hearing how steady my voice was and not trusting it. He nodded and slid 2 envelopes across the desk. Heavy paper, heavy words, the kind of weight you feel in your palm. For the kids, he said, tapping the thicker envelope with his pen. And for your son, he tapped a slim one. This one's surgical. I don't want to humiliate him, I said, surprising myself by how much I meant it. I want him to understand what he tried to sell me. You can't control understanding, Cal said, and he meant it kindly, but you can control delivery. I stopped at a store on the way home that smelled like cinnamon and the last week of a retail worker's patience. I bought 2 boxes, one small, one the size of a shoebox, and a roll of brown paper that looks like letters used to look when the world took time. For the kids, I put in small things that were not small library cards, with a note promising a standing Saturday adventure, a Polaroid camera with extra packs of film, a letter that said, take pictures of what matters, not what shines, and the documents, in a bright red folder they'd be told not to lose, with Emily's name on the outside and the trustee's card inside. I added 2 stuffed animals because ritual matters. You should always be able to hug a thing you're told is good for you. For my son, I put the letter on top of something that wouldn't move, a binder I'd made from the shoebox, copies of receipts, returned mail, an itinerary of attempts. On the first page, I slipped in a photograph of him and me on a fishing dock, his small hand in mine, both of us squinting into the sun like it was daring us to blink first. The caption, in my handwriting older than it used to be, I never stopped standing here. I wrapped the kids' box in brown paper and string, the way my mother wrapped things before we had too much tape. I wrapped my sons in the same paper. Symmetry is a kind of fairness. The night before Christmas Eve, I stood at my small kitchen window and watched the snow start. The city went quiet in that way that feels like a secret. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor laughed and the sound bounced, warm and blurry, off paint that needed a third coat. I turned off the light and tried to sleep. At 2:13 a.m., I was staring at the ceiling again. I tried imagining the conversation going well and the one where it went to hell. My brain, helpful as ever, ran both at once. Picture dash in dash picture dot. At 6 o'clock, I showered. I shaved slowly. A man should look like he respects the people he's going to see, even if he doesn't know if they respect him. I put on the only suit I still owned that fit without complaining about the waist. I almost grabbed the tie. My mother liked the one with tiny pine trees, but it felt like putting someone else's holiday in my pocket. I chose the simple blue one, safe, honest. I put the boxes in the van carefully, like they were fragile. They were. Emily answered the door. You can tell a lot in the first second. She didn't perform surprise or obligation. She stepped back, opened the door wide, and said, Joe, I'm Emily. Come in out of the cold. The house smelled like cinnamon and pot roast and crayons, a lived-in smell. The tree was taller than it needed to be and leaned a little left, which made it perfect. The boilium was on the floor with a dinosaur puzzle. The girl Sophie wore a paper crown and the exact expression my son used to wear when he concentrated, tongue pressed against her top teeth, like she was trying to keep a secret from her own mouth. My son came down the stairs a half-second late. He looked older than 38, if you stared, and younger if you didn't. We measured the distance between us with a glance, and then tried to pretend we hadn't. Joe, he said. He didn't do the awkward hug. He didn't stick out his hand. He hovered high, I said, and it was somehow too formal and too small. We moved through the day on rails. Coffee, small talk, the choreography of people who knew how to be polite with strangers. Every time my son said dad to his kids, the word did a trick in my chest, cutting and healing in the same motion. The kids were easy. Children don't know they're supposed to judge. They asked the right questions. Do you have a dog? Can you fix the loose step? Do you like dinosaurs or sharks better? Sharks, I told Liam gravely. They get all the press, but dinosaurs are more interesting. And his face lit like he'd been seen by a prophet. At dinner, the table was a painting, poinsettias and chipped plates, and the gravy boat that had seen more jokes than gravy. Emily carved conversation like a turkey, passing pieces to everyone. My son watched me the way you watch a guest speaker who might say something off script. We got through Grace, through green beans, through the first wave of stories about people I didn't know yet but wanted to, and then he cleared his throat. So, he said, like a man who has arrived at the item on the agenda he wanted to speak on. Joe, we were hoping to get your take on what you said in your text, about talking about the future. Emily's hand moved under the tablecloth. She squeezed his knee or pointed her toe at him. Whatever it was, it made him recalculate. I set down my fork. I took a sip of water. The glass had a tiny chip on the rim that grabbed your lip if you weren't careful. I let it remind me to be careful. I brought gifts, I said, for the future. Liam clapped. Sophie said, is it a puppy? And Emily laughed for the first time in a way that made me want to like her regardless of how the rest went. My son's smile landed on his face a fraction late. That's great. I stood, slow enough to give anyone who wanted to object the window to do it. No one did. I went to the living room where the tree leaned left and retrieved the two boxes. The big one made the floor creak. The small one fit under my arm like a book. I put the big one in front of the kids. I put the small one in front of my son. Sophie breathed in like the air was whipped cream. Liam bounced one heel against the floor in a rhythm only he understood. Open after dinner, my son said, trying for authority and getting fatherly, which is a better look on any man. Then he caught my eye. The question in it was naked. I nodded. After dinner, we ate quickly after that, because children and suspense are a cruel combination. When the plates were stacked, and the last spoon scraped the last gravy from the dish, I said, shall we? We moved to the tree. The lights flickered once, and decided to keep going. I sat on the floor because kids lived closer to the ground, and because my knees needed to remember they still worked. Go ahead, I told Liam and Sophie, and they did what children do. They tore paper with both hands, delicately savage. The animals came out first. Sophie hugged hers like it had been hers forever. Liam held his at arm's length, assessing if it would survive the life he intended to give it. The Polaroid camera got a reverent whoa. The library cards, when Emily read the note, made her cover her mouth for a second and nod. Once, like a promise was landing. Then she found the red folder. She looked at me, then at my son, then back at me. She opened it and read fast, the way you read when you're seeing if there's a catch. There wasn't. There was structure. My son didn't reach for the folder. He watched it like a deer watches a salt lick he didn't ask for. What is that? He asked, smiling too widely. Trusts, Emily said softly. She swallowed. For the kids' trusts, he repeated. Wow. He made it sound like a foreign word. He hadn't opened his box yet. Go on, I said, and I could hear the steel in my voice even if no one else could. Open yours. He lifted the lid carefully, like there might be something alive inside. In a way, there was. He saw the letter first. He read the first line. His jaw tightened. He read the second and looked up at me with a face that tried to be a man's and landed on a boy's. He read the third and then stopped reading silently. It says, he started, then stopped. He looked at Emily, who was watching him with a tightness around her eyes that told me this might not be the first time she'd seen him. Between two rooms, he held up the binder. Pages stared back. Receipts, dates, a history no one had told him because people tell children stories to protect themselves. He flipped. A certificate of mailing. A photo of a birthday card returned unopened. The sticker bright and cheerful. Returned to sender. What is this? He asked, but it was the kind of question that isn't a question. It was, this doesn't fit the story I've been living. It's 20 years, I said quietly. It's what I did when I wasn't allowed to do anything else. The room shrank. The sounds got bright. The paper crackled too loud. The radiator hissed like it had an opinion. He put the binder down. He picked up the letter again. He got to the paragraph about therapy and laughed. A single hard explosion of air that wasn't humor. "You want me to go to therapy for money?" he said flatly. I shook my head. "I want you to go to therapy for yourself. The money doesn't go to you. The money goes to your children, without your hands on it. Mine goes to the work we never did if you want to do it." Emily exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since the doorbell rang. My son looked at the red folder again. He looked at the string on the kids' brown paper like it might tell him what the right face was. "You came here to punish me," he said, but his voice had a question in it he couldn't keep out. I said the only sentence that had kept me steady for a week. "I came here to not buy what isn't for sale." He stood so fast Sophie's paper crown slid into his lap. "You kept a dossier," he said, voice sharp enough to cut the lights. "On me." "On time," I corrected quietly. "On the time I wasn't allowed to have." He laughed, that hard non-laugh again. "And now you're Santa with strings. Therapy trusts we can't touch. You really came here to make a point." Emily's hand found the air between us like she could hold the heat back. "Can we step outside?" she asked, calm the way you have to be to land a plane. We moved to the kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator felt loud, like a white flag. From the living room came Liam's careful whisper to his sister. The way kids whisper when they think grown-ups will break if they hear the truth. "Grandpa isn't mad. He's sad." The word hit me like a soft thing thrown hard. I watched it fall. My son planted his hands on the counter. "You think I need to earn my way back into your will?" "No," I said. "I think we both need to earn our way back into each other's lives." He rolled his eyes. It was a teenage move, and he wore it like an old shirt. "Don't make this poetic, Joe. You got rich. You don't owe anybody your money. I get it. You also don't get to use it to punish." I counted 3 breaths out before I spoke. "I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting them." I nodded toward the living room, toward the small crown and the dinosaur and the children inventing a holiday we might deserve. "And I'm protecting something else. The truth. The truth is, you left," he snapped. "The truth is, I left a marriage that was killing both of us," I said. And my voice picked up an edge I hadn't planned for, a steel wire under velvet. "I paid every month. I showed up every week. I wrote every birthday and Christmas. Look at the binder. Look at it. The truth is, someone told you a story where I was the villain because it made it easier to live with the empty chair." Emily's eyes shone. She pressed her lips together, and in that thin line was an entire marriage of negotiations, small and large. He stared at me without blinking for a beat too long. "Even if I believed you," he said finally, the if in his mouth a weapon, "what you did tonight was cruel." I thought of all the Decembers I had eaten sandwiches instead of dinners, all the steps I hadn't fixed because I didn't know where the loose one was, all the firsts I had watched through a screen. I let the anger come up and sit, and then I let it pass, like a wave that doesn't earn the shore. "I brought the kids a future I can stand behind," I said. "I brought you an offer that isn't a bribe. 12 sessions. You and me in a room with someone who can hold the rope. We look at what happened. We say if we do that, I will consider a gift to you that doesn't buy your love. It will be sized to a life, not a silence." He scoffed. "Therapy like a game show requirement. Therapy like a door." I said. "We can both walk through not, but I am done being talked about like a ghost." He pushed back from the counter so hard the stool tipped. Emily reached to steady it on instinct. He stalked to the doorway, stopped, turned back with something raw in his face I recognized like old weather. "What if I say no?" "Then you say no," I said, "and nothing changes. The kids' trusts are irrevocable. You can't touch them. If you try, the trustee will lock it down tighter. If you call a lawyer, I'll tell him to read the no contest clause out loud." Slowly, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "And I'll leave here knowing I did the next right thing, even if it didn't feel good." He looked at Emily for backup. She didn't step into the lane he built. "Maybe we should read the binder," she said softly. "Maybe we should go to therapy, once for us, not for money." He flinched like she'd picked a side. "We don't need a stranger," he muttered. "We need a father who..." He stopped himself, bit the sentence in half, swallowed. "Forget it." I could feel the night bending. The part of me that had wanted this Christmas to stitch a wound tugged like a child at my sleeve. The other part, the one that had packed the binder, signed the trust, chosen the tie that told no lies, held the line. I slid a white envelope across the counter. Cal liked heavy paper. It made moments feel like they had weight. This has the therapist's name. First appointment is held for December 27th at 4. If you don't want it, call and cancel. If you do, I'll be there. He didn't touch the envelope. Emily did. She read the name like she was trying it on. What am I supposed to tell the kids? He asked, suddenly smaller. Tell them the truth, I said. That their grandpa loves them enough to plan. That their dad and their grandpa are going to try to learn a new language. He barked a humorless laugh. What language is that? Honest, I said. It's difficult. Worth it. He stood there breathing like he'd just run a race he hadn't trained for. Then he walked out of the kitchen and past the tree and out the front door into a night that smelled like iron and pine and the kind of cold that makes your teeth ache. Emily stared at the closed door for 3 Mississippi seconds. Then she met my eyes. I'm sorry, she said. We have been under strain. He lost money in a thing with a friend. It's not an excuse. It's an angle he's been seeing everything through. She looked toward the living room, where Liam had discovered the Polaroid and was taking a picture of the paper crown on the floor. I know you didn't come to hurt anyone. I came to stop hurting, I said. Those are cousins. Sometimes they get along. She nodded. She slid the envelope into the junk drawer. If he doesn't go, she said carefully, I might. That's allowed, I said, and meant it. I said goodbye to the kids with hugs they climbed into, the way children do when they trust the arms. Sophie whispered, can you come to the library with us? And I said, yes, because one true thing should exist for every two we're not ready to say yet. On the porch, my breath made sleeves in the air. I stood where I'd stood 20 Christmases ago in a different town with a different wreath. Back then, my hands had been empty. Tonight, they smelled faintly of cinnamon and printer ink. The night was sharp enough to think with. I drove home through streets that still believed in quiet. The van heater blew steady. My mind ran loops until they tired themselves out. When I got to my apartment, I placed the remaining copy of the letter in my own drawer, next to the pine tie I hadn't worn. I opened my laptop and recorded a video 3 minutes. No edits for Liam and Sophie, just in case life did what it does and got in the way. I told them about the first time their father held a fish, and how he was so proud he refused to admit it scared him. I told them about library dust, and how it lives on your hands like a secret map. I told them I was learning too. Then I opened a new document and finished what Cal and I had started. A codicil to my will, with a clause that would unlock a modest trust for my son after 12 completed sessions. After a joint letter signed by both of us and the therapist, if the sessions didn't happen within a year, that portion would be redirected to a scholarship fund for apprentices in the trade skids who needed a hand that didn't ask them to pretend to be grateful for a story they didn't choose. I named the scholarship after someone who deserved it, my son's mother, for the good she did. I slept like a man who had made a decision. Not well, not long, but straight. The morning of the 27th, snow had crusted over the city like clear sugar. I arrived at the therapist's office early, which is another way of admitting I was afraid to be late. The waiting room smelled faintly of tea and old upholstery. A tiny fountain made the sound of water having a thought. 4 o'clock came. 4:05. The door opened. He walked in with his coat unzipped like he couldn't decide whether to stay. He didn't look at me when he sat. This is stupid, he muttered. Probably, I said softly. Most brave things are at first. We didn't talk to each other for the first 10 minutes. We talked to Dr. Khan, who had gentle socks and sharp questions. She started with the smallest knife. What brings you both here? My father's conditions, he said. My son, I said. Dr. Khan nodded like people say that more than you'd think. We'll start with one rule, she said. Say your own feelings, not the other person's. Put your name in your sentence. He stiffened. He caught himself. I felt abandoned. I swallowed. I felt refused. The word surprised me. It felt accurate, like finding the right-sized wrench in a bowl of wrong ones. He rubbed his jaw. I have memories, he said, and they do not include you where they were supposed to. I have receipts, I said, and then smiled because I heard the clip of it. And I have memories where I was outside the door of your memories. Dr. Khan wrote something down like a scribe at a battle, whose job was to make sure the story made it out. We underlined a sentence. She said, keep going. He didn't. He sat in the kind of silence that makes your back hurt. Then, all at once, he slumped. He looked tired, which is different than looking angry. When Mum died, he said, voice suddenly small. I felt like I was holding a bag of bricks that said reasons on it, and some of them were hers and some of them were mine, and I couldn't put them down because then I'd have to admit I'd built some of the wall myself. I inhaled sharply. I wasn't good at marriage, I said. I was learning to be a man in rooms that didn't forgive. I thought money on time and showing up on time would be enough in a world that knew how to weaponize delay. I was wrong. Dr. Khan let that sit like bread dough. Then she asked, "Can you each name one apology that costs you something?" He closed his eyes. "I'm sorry I told you not to call," he whispered. "I wanted to hurt you for not being there. It worked too well." My throat burned. I stared at my hands. "I'm sorry I let a system tell me who I was allowed to be," I said. "I should have fought harder for a new system." I was tired, and I mistook tired for finished. We didn't fix 20 years in 50 minutes. We did something worse and better. We told the truth until it began to hurt, in a way that felt like progress at the end. He stood in the doorway with his coat still unzipped. "I don't want your money," he said, which was not only a lie, not anymore. It was something more complicated. "I want," he trailed off. "A father," I offered, gentle. He swallowed. He nodded once. "Barely." Next Wednesday, Dr. Khan said to both of us, like it was the most normal sentence in the world. He didn't promise. He didn't refuse. He went home to the house with the leaning tree. I went home to the radiator and the shoes by the door that waited for no one. "Before we go back," the text read, "You should know I posted something I shouldn't have." I took it down. My stomach did that slow elevator drop. I typed, "What was it?" He hesitated long enough to make me feel the length of the room. "A rant," he wrote, "about you, money, Christmas." It got responses. Emily made me delete it. A vision of a feed flooded with strangers offering hot takes on my life flared behind my eyes. People who would call me heroic and people who would call me a monster based on the paragraph they saw. The paragraph I didn't write. My chest went tight like the day-old smoke feels when it finally climbs out of your curtains. "Thank you for telling me," I wrote back, because it was the right sentence and because I needed him to feel what a right sentence looks like. "I'm sorry," he wrote. "I was trying to hurt you back. It's a reflex I hate." I stared out the window where the city was thawing into 100 small rivers. I thought of the binder, the December porch, the way anger feels like heat and then leaves you colder. I typed, "We're learning. See you Wednesday." The second session was worse than the first because adrenaline had left and embarrassment had taken its seat. We were both more careful and more dangerous. Dr. Khan earned every dollar. He wanted me to post, my son said at one point. Half the friend who cost us money. He said it would apply pressure. He says a lot of things that sound like plans. "What do you want?" Dr. Khan asked. He looked lost. "I don't know," he whispered. I thought I wanted to be right. I said nothing. Wanting to be right is a hobby. I used to pay dues too. We talked about his mother for the first time without making her a saint or a knife. She had done heroic things and mean things and everything in between. Because that's what people do when they're tired and proud and trying. We talked about how a boy learns to hold on to a story because losing it feels like losing the person who told it. We talked about my father, how he had died with his hands still scarred and his regrets neatly folded on, how I had promised myself I'd make different mistakes. Outside the window, the sky learned a new gray. We kept our appointments. We missed one when Liam got the fever that eats weekends. We made it up on a Saturday morning, and I brought bagels and we ate them slowly like we were practicing being a family at breakfast, without needing anyone to play pretend. It wasn't a montage. It was hard. He was defensive. I was stubborn. We were both better at lists than feelings, but things shifted, degree by degree, like a door when you stop pushing it from the wrong side. At session 5, he said, "I told Emily I want my kids to know you." He didn't look at me when he said it. He folded and unfolded the edge of a napkin until it looked like a white river. "Not because of money, because you know how to fix things. Because I don't know how to fix everything, and I'm tired of pretending." I swallowed twice before my voice worked. "I can teach them how to patch drywall," I said, "because men like me meet enormous feelings at the hardware store, and how to tell the truth without needing to be the hero in it." Dr. Khan smiled like a cat. Seeing a sunpatch dot at session 9, he admitted he had called a lawyer after Christmas anyway. "He told me your trusts are airtight," he said, sheepish and a little grudgingly admiring. He said if I pushed, I'd risk losing what little claim I still had on your goodwill. he said. He grimaced. He said you were principled. Get his name, I said dryly. I'll send him a Christmas card. He laughed, really laughed, for the first time. The sound surprised both of us at session 12. The last of the initial agreement. We sat with the mountain between us and the worn path on it. Dr. Conn asked, "What does repair look like now?" He looked at me. "Pizza night," he said, like a man naming a miracle that wouldn't scare it away. "Fridays, when it works. You and the kids. Me too, if you want." I blinked. The room blurred. "I want," I said. "And the money?" Dr. Conn asked, because someone had to carry the heavy word back in and set it down gently. He rubbed his jaw. "I don't want a check," he said. And he didn't flinch this time. "I want a plan. I want partners." I had come prepared for this moment. Not with paper this time, with a small, square box. Inside, on black foam, lay my old crimping tool. Polished until the letters I'd scratched into the handle with a nail 30 years ago gleamed like they belonged to a man who knew what his hands were for. "For you," I said. And when he opened it and saw the initials, he made a sound I will think about the last morning of my life. "Not because you'll need to crimp duct for a living, because I want you to remember what builds a future. Tools, not windfalls." He held it like it might bruise if he gripped it too hard. "I kept telling myself I deserved," he said. "I didn't stop to ask what I could build." We both breathed. The fountain bubbled like it was tired of pretending to be a river dot after the session. We walked out into a world that had decided to be blue again. On the sidewalk, he stopped. "Does the clock still stand?" he asked, not looking at me. "About a gift after the 12. "It does," I said. "And I've decided what size looks like a life and not a silence." I paused. "It's a partnership stake in a small company that trains techs for home services. You'll have to put in hours teaching, learning, showing up. Money you earn from it will be yours. Money it spins off will go to the scholarship fund in your mother's name unless you double it with sweat." He exhaled a breath I recognized because I'd once used it to pretend I wasn't crying. "I can do sweat," he said. "I've always been better at sweat than at phone calls." "Same," I said. "We'll both try harder at the second thing." And we did. Pizza nights were chaotic and holy. Liam learned to use the Polaroid with an eye that lined up life the way it felt, not the way it looked. Sophie took to the library like a sea creature returning to the ocean. Emily and I found a rhythm of respect. She would text when the loose step creaked louder. I'd show up with a drill and humility. My son and I argued about the thermostat and compost, and whether you could fold laundry and watch old game films at the same time. We were less careful. That's how you know a family is happening. It creaks. There were setbacks. In April, he ghosted me for 2 weeks after a fight in which I said something true in a tone that turned it into a weapon. He came back to therapy one more time and said, "I don't know how to not hear you as an indictment." And I said, "I don't know how to not speak like a closing argument." And we both laughed because humor is the only tool that sometimes works like a key. In June, the scholarship fund sent me a photo of 5 kids with grease under their nails, holding certificates. The banner behind them said the M. Carter Fellowship, and seeing his mother's initial there did something to my spine, like someone had straightened it while I wasn't paying attention. I sent the photo to my son. He didn't respond with words. He sent a picture of the crimping tool on his kitchen table. No caption. None needed. In August, there was a barbecue where he burned the chicken and blamed the grill, and I told him. About the time I almost set a client's gutters on fire, trying to demonstrate a better way, and we laughed for so long the mosquito bites forgot to itch. In October, he called me first when the water heater died at midnight. "I know it's late," he said, sheepish. I just stemmily said, "Call your dad," and it sounded like a sentence I wanted to hear out loud. I drove over with my toolbox and a sense of being needed that didn't feel like a bill. By the time the next December came around, the tree still leaned left, and the paper crown still tore on cue, and the radiator still hissed like it had an opinion about our progress. I handed Liam new film. I handed Sophie a book about bridges and told her it was really about people. I handed my son a manila envelope with numbers in it that were real and modest and tied to hours. He would have to work at the training company alongside me, teaching kids how to use their hands to build a life that didn't forget their names. He opened it and looked at me the way men look at other men when they're not pretending to be boys. "Thank you," he said. He didn't say finally or about time. He said the sentence like it was new and he wanted to use it correctly. We ate. We told the same stories again, and added one or two for flavor. When it was time for grace, he cleared his throat. "I'll do it," he said, and everyone looked at him like he'd offered to land the plane. He took a breath. "I'm grateful for repair," he said bluntly and beautifully, "and for pizza, and for fathers who are stubborn in the right ways." He looked at me, "and for kids who teach us about wonder, and for women who make us better." He squeezed Emily's hand in the air without grabbing it. "Amen, amen," we said, a room full of people who had earned the word. The revenge, if you still want to call it that, wasn't a headline. It was a structure. It was money that went where it should, and love that went where it could, and boundaries that held like good beams. It was the look on my son's face when he realized the inheritance he truly wanted was quittant, be stolen or starved or bought, only built later, after dishes, when the house was dark, except for the tree, and the kind of light that makes even dust look holy. Liam brought the Polaroid and pressed a photo into my hand. It was me and my son on the couch, his shoulder an inch from mine, the inch that feels like a mile and a blessing. We were both the picture had that Polaroid quality where truth blurs a little but doesn't lie. On the bottom, in block letters, he'd written, "Dad plus Grandpa Christmas." I felt something in me unclench that had been holding on for 20 years. I didn't let go of the picture, because sometimes the thing you've been holding out your hand for finally arrives, and you're afraid if you blink, it'll go back to the place where dreams pay rent. At the door. When I put on my coat, my son followed me onto the porch. We stood in the same winter air, where we had last been miserable together. He stuck his hands into his pockets like a boy about to ask for permission to stay out late. "I used to think revenge would feel like winning," he said, a small smile making the statement gentler than it had any right to be. "Now it feels like not needing it." I looked at him and saw all my mistakes and his, and the pile of bricks we were slowly taking apart too. "Build something that looked like home. Justice is warmer," I said. "It's slower too, but it keeps." His breath made a cloud. He looked at me for a long second, measuring the distance like a carpenter. "Dad," he said, and the word didn't stumble or apologize or check to see who was listening. It just stood there, finally, on its own feet. "Yeah," I said, and I didn't try to hide what the word did to me. "See you Friday," he said. "Pizza, pizza," I said, and the porch felt like a doorway again instead of a border. I walked to the van. The night didn't feel like something you survive anymore. It felt like something you live in. People think revenge is a momentous slamming of a door, a check ripped in half, a speech that shuts the room up. Sometimes it is, but the most satisfying justice I've learned tastes like structure. It tastes like trusts written with children's names, and a therapist's appointment kept, even when your pride is screaming. It tastes like the apology that costs you something, and you say it anyway because the future is more interesting than the story you've been protecting. My son came back to me, not because I paid him, but because I refused to. He came back because I invited him to the thing love actually demands: effort. We stood on the same porch where we had both once said hard words, and we learned a new sentence together. It didn't sound like victory. It sounded like home. The money. It's doing the least glamorous, most important work it can. Buying textbooks and wrenches, time and film packs, the kind of Saturdays that build a person out of curiosity instead of complaint. The scholarship fund has a way. The training company smells like metal and coffee and pride, and on a certain refrigerator, there's a Polaroid of two men with the same nose and a new way of using it to laugh. If you want a bow on it, here it is. The night before this Christmas, I took the shoebox out from under my bed and finally took the binder out of it. I didn't throw the shoebox away. I put inside it New Things Library checkout slips with Liam's name, a ticket stub from Sophie's first school play, where she was a tree and somehow still the star, a pizza receipt with an oily fingerprint where he'd tapped, thinking, the box is heavier now, but it rides easier. That's what truth does when you carry it together. If that story hit you somewhere you've been guarding, if you've ever had to choose structure over spectacle, justice over a quick hit of revenge, tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment with the line you needed to hear tonight. And if you're out there building a quieter kind of legacy, I see you. Keep going.